required reporting.
Sorry, I forgot to start the recording. I just started it. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. We put teeth in the legislation so that law enforcement agencies lose their money if they don't report to the required standards. So it's what we tried to do is create a comprehensive system that where you can measure and evaluate its performance and fix things and make it up to date. And that involves the bill has appropriations in it. It has a lot of definitions in it. It has criteria in it. It has all sorts of, it's a 30-some page bill. So it's got a lot of stuff in it. And if you've read lots of bills, it's old legislation that's updated with new language. So it's not particularly easy to follow. I will be producing intelligible summaries of this. It is literally getting sponsors today, going into the caucus process in the Senate Democratic leadership. Mo Maestas will probably be taking a lead on it now that he is a senator rather than a representative. But it started out with a lot of support from Peter Wirth's office and a bunch of other people. We've had pretty much solid positive feedback from legislators so far. We have a coalition of law enforcement leaders, including police chiefs, sheriffs, satellite training facility directors, all DAs, lots of people who've stepped up and want to have involvement with this. We're meeting with them on Friday, and they will give us their comments and edits, and I will rewrite parts of the bill to reflect that. So we've been building a coalition in the law enforcement community for this, led by the community, by Indivisible SOS, which is 100 and some women who live here in Santa Fe and do advocacy. So everybody is sort of shocked. It's a new process. They haven't seen this kind of advocacy play out all the way to a bill. They've had a lot of industry bills and a lot of things coming from interest groups in the community, but this has become a real partnership with a lot of law enforcement leaders from around the state. So it's pretty exciting. I can try to answer questions. It is, there's a copy that is around. There'll be a new version next week. It will be filed as soon as things open up for filing, probably January 3rd or 4th or something. It'll be one of the first bills filed.
Thank you, Rachel. I just want to point out that Bruce Weatherby has put in the chat that he's a reporter. So we don't have any problem with that at all. I don't think anybody on here does. And we are recording this Zoom. So I want to make sure everybody knows that.
Okay.
So does anybody have questions for Rachel about that bill? Of course, none of the bills have numbers yet. They won't until they're introduced come January. So any questions?
I was just going to add to what she said. I talked to her for 30 minutes today, and I was so impressed with the approach. It's not just a training bill, so they slap on another bit of training that maybe responds to people who are going, we need training, we need something for this or that or the other thing. It's like weaving together that training within a larger system that will create accountability and allow the oversight bodies to identify the need for other training based on performance and target it and get it done, and then hold officers and systems responsible and accountable. So it's very interesting. Of course, the devil's in the details. So we'll see the bill in a week or so.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat of what the name of the bill is.
Well, we're negotiating that. I've been calling it Strengthening Law Enforcement Professions. What we found was that when you talk to law enforcement leaders, police chiefs, sheriffs, not the political organizations that represent them, but the people on the front lines who are supervising the people on the front lines, the morale is low. There's vacancy rates. They have a hard time attracting and keeping people. People don't feel like they're professionals. They don't feel like the community sees them as professionals. They want to be professionals. They want to be respected.
They ought to be.
And they ought to be. They have very dangerous jobs that require a lot of judgment, thinking on their feet. And so this is really what they want and what they should get. They should be entitled to this kind of support from the state. We're putting professional development, which every other professional has, does not exist in law enforcement. That's in the bill. We want people to see paths, career paths, options for their futures when they go into law enforcement, so that they are not stuck where they start. And they're not getting the same training every year when they go to in-service training and watch the same videotape. We want them to feel that they're getting up to date, modernized, scientifically evidence-based training and experience and input. And we can buy that. We can get it. There's lots of it. There's a lot of work being done nationally.
Somebody needs to mute, and if you have a question, please use the raise hand function so we can call on you so we know who's talking.
So anyway, we're proposing a 5-year cycle where this gets looked at every 5 years and revised and updated and modernized. It's not just a once every 2 or 3 decades, which is what it's basically been.
Okay,
All
great.
right,
Thank you, Rachel.
So I'm going to take a shot at updating on what transpired at the last meeting of one of the things I've been doing is attending an awful lot of coalition team meetings that are driving the development of legislation. A lot of these are driven by volunteers, and the Modernizing the Legislature Coalition is being directed by Tom Solomon, a volunteer. And he's doing a magnificent job of it. And they meet every week for an hour or two to discuss strategy and so forth. And we heard Monday morning from, I think it was from legislators who basically laid out exactly what they're thinking the proposals will be. Because recall, they're asking for the legislators to be paid, for there to be staff that's dedicated to those legislators to be paid, and for a longer session. Well, the longer session and the pay require a constitutional amendment, 2 separate constitutional amendments. And God forbid they pass the long extending the session and then turn down the salaries, because
But the
we'll have a
paid,
revolution.
right, paid staff does not require
Right.
even a bill, does it?
Yes, it does. It
Okay, a
requires
bill, but not a constitutional amendment.
And there
All right.
will be at least one bill, and I believe it's going to be in the feed bill, which is is it SB3, HB3?
funding.
It's the funding for the session. And so that should fly pretty quickly. And that would create not just pay for salaries for those staff, but also for Roxanne's removing my notes.
I'm just trying to get him to hold his head up and set up.
The bill would pay salaries for the staff, but also create an oversight committee to make sure that those staff are supervised. And then there would be 2 constitutional amendments, one to lengthen the session and one to set up a commission to set salaries every 2 years for legislators.
Well, and one of the things we've learned recently is that a lot of people in the state believe that legislators are already getting paid. Many people, they did some kind of survey. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen to get the bill passed and then to get the constitutional amendment passed.
That coalition of volunteers constructed the survey that was done by Common Cause and gave us data that showed that while there's a great deal of misinformation, as Roxanne just noted, about people thinking that the legislators get paid, there's also a great deal of support for paying the legislators.
Well, and one of the things people really need to also understand is that if their legislators are paid, they are then enabled to do a much better job, and they can respond to their constituents and do all kinds of things that a volunteer legislature doesn't have time or staff to do. So it really is going to be really improve the functioning of the legislature.
And last week I interviewed Michael Roca, who was one of the speakers at an ethics panel in Santa Fe 2 weeks ago now. And
He's
he's the professor of poli-sci at UNM, and he wrote a report on professionalizing the legislature, and also one on cronyism and economic development in New Mexico. So this guy knows how money and stuff works within the system. I'd strongly recommend listening to that interview. He's a tremendous interview. He's so glib and off the cuff, no notes whatsoever.
And you can find that on our website at retakeourdemocracy.org. And it's on, if you go to actions and events, one of the tabs at the top, you'll see what'll pop up. You'll see where the recorded radio shows are, and
Or you can just go to the homepage and retake on the radios. Right
Retake
there
on the radio. Yeah,
on the
yeah.
homepage. And
So, I was going to ask Rick Ann if she had anything she wanted to add to that, since
Yeah.
she's been working
ahead.
on this.
Oh, I think you did a great job. The polls were very favorable in the 60s and 70 percentiles between strongly favor and favor. All of the different initiatives, paying the legislators, lengthening the sessions, and getting paid staff as well. So the public is behind this.
One of
great.
the things that Michael Roca made a great point about is that right now the legislature is the weakest branch of the three branches, and they offer no check to the governor's office whatsoever. The budget gets handed down to them in January, and then they can try and wrestle with it and change it a little bit, but it's developed administratively, really. And that by strengthening the and also bills are developed. They don't come to the legislature necessarily, industry. They come to the fourth floor, to the governor, because she's in session all year round. The legislators are not in session. And so it creates this imbalance where too much is being decided and determined at the governor's level, at the administrative staff, her cabinet, and not enough by the legislature itself. So that's
Anybody have any questions about that one? And we can always, if something pops up later, we'll try to save at least a few minutes at the end for any questions that you didn't think of now. Is Jeremy on the call yet? Jeremy Smith? He's going to talk about hydrogen. No, he is not. I'm checking the list. Okay, well, let's move on.
Ellen, maybe you could text Jeremy and see if he could get on. The next person up would be Charles Goodmacher and Rebecca Neal, who are going to talk on Public Health and Climate Resiliency Act, to be introduced by Liz Stefanix and Liz Thompson in 2023. So we have to elevate them to.
No.
Oh, we don't.
No,
we
Becca and
Becca
Charles,
and Charles.
if you're ready, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Charles.
And I'm Becca.
And Becca's a volunteer, and I am actually lobbying for this bill on behalf of New Mexico Voices for Children that many of you are probably supporters of, certainly know of. It's also backed by about a dozen other groups right now. Sorry, I'm forgetting the exact title of the Pediatrician Society, NRDC, several environmental groups, but also New Mexico Public Health Association and so on. But what you want to hear is what it's about. It's really a bill to protect our people from the ravages of climate change. At least to create a little bit, and I mean that in the sense of very direct protection of our health. So this is not a bill that has any aspect of mitigation in it. We're 100% for everything we can do to stop climate change happening and getting worse, but it's a bill that says it's here, it's hurting our health now, and it's the only responsible thing to do now that these extreme weather events are happening and getting more intense, is to start planning from a public health perspective, as well as from other perspectives of how we can keep New Mexicans healthy and our state vital. So it creates a fund. Part of it, there's two parts of it. The what I think is the main part, it is a fund for local communities to start planning processes. And there's language in the bill that would incentivize, the Department of Health would manage it, and it would give priority to proposals from communities, low income and disadvantaged communities. It also, so like, let's say Socorro County, pick that out of a hat. If they could write a grant to do analysis of the data, the health data, the status of their people in their county and geolocating, they could overlay that with all sorts of incredible data that's available about what's actually happening with the climate and projections of what's happening. The state already has a lot of that data, especially for water planning, but for other purposes. So there are scientific based projections of what's going to happen in certain areas of the state. So a county like Socorro County could say, oh gosh, it looks like we might have to prepare for fire, for smoke, maybe intense heat waves. And we know there's a bunch of people, while we might be able to set up a rescue center or two, and that could be part of the planning, where to put them, what goes into a rescue center. They also know from health data that there's a whole lot of folks who can't get to a rescue center for lots of reasons, or it would be really hard for them to get there. So, a county might decide, let's buy a whole bunch of relatively cheap air cleaners and supplies for making rooms more airtight. And let's at least get those to some people who are really in remote locations so that they're prepared in advance, they won't get as harmed. So there's not, the other part of the bill is actually to support some positions in the health department to manage that grant, but also in the state's climate task force. The health department has not had a major role yet. They only have 0.2 of an FTE assigned specifically to climate change and public health. So this would create 6 positions there, and bet Becca has a whole bunch of other thoughts to add about why the bill is needed and provisions of it.
Yeah, I think Charles hit all the high points. I think the idea is that, like Charles said, climate change is impacting our health now in a lot of different ways: air quality, extreme heat, fires, flooding, all those things. And we don't have a coordinated response at the state level. And a lot of states don't. And so we're behind the ball on that. And so what this bill does is it provides the funding for the health department to actually create a coordinated plan to address and respond to these health impacts. And then also to distribute that funding to different communities who, might experience certain impacts uniquely, whether it's from fires or from drought or things like that. And so it's really, really critical to have, a holistic, coordinated response with funding and staff behind it to back communities up. And so it's going to be a really important bill.
Can I ask a question? Will it address, you mentioned, some of the downstream consequences of climate change. What about studying and providing health information and interventions for people impacted by the extractive industry who experience high levels of asthma and so forth?
Yeah, the bill doesn't specifically address anything about industry, just the weather, the climate, so to speak. The concept is, I want to might relate to what you asked about. So far, we've only talked about the extreme weather events. So, when we're talking about climate change and health, like the temperature, I don't know if you all know this, but the temperature in New Mexico has actually already risen to 2 degrees. So we're above 1.5, because New Mexico is the most impacted state just because of the oddities, peculiarities of our landscape, whatever. But so there are changes happening. Like you all might have seen this last summer. There were a lot of news reports about new mosquitoes in the Albuquerque area in greater volume. That's because of the weather is changing. So everything is changing. Our ecosystem is changing. So the mosquitoes can have, what do they bring? Insect-borne diseases as well. So there's a lot of different things to plan for, but there's nothing that's tied to specific, locations of industries.
But if I could add, the environmental public health tracking program within the Department of Health, they are really focused on things like Superfund sites and extractive industries' impact on health. And they don't, because we don't have this climate money, they also don't have, the resources and the time and the people to focus on those connections between climate and extractive industry as well. And so I think that that's definitely something that could come from this bill, even though, that's not necessarily in the language. In developing this program, what are the issues that are affecting New Mexico? We all know that extractive industry is certainly one of them.
You think?
Does the bill have a name yet?
Yeah, public health and climate resiliency.
Okay, good. And I see Bruce has his hand up. Do you have a question, Bruce?
Yes, I do. I think it's really commendable that you're advancing this legislation. I also would like to know if folks are at all focused on, I understand your bill has some funding for positions, but right now the Department of Health has a vacancy rate of 30%. That's, when you think about this is a third of the people that there are already authorized positions and funding for are not working there. And you have a similar situation at the New Mexico Environment Department. It's close to 30%. People, every once in a while, the secretary will say, oh, we've just hired a bunch more people. But what they don't tell you is the people who left, and not by the usual, just retiring people who are leaving because they're incredibly discouraged that they can't get the work done. The new legislation that was put on the books earlier this year relative to improvements in more stringent recording of ozone harming gases, they're not able to function as an agency to do their current work. And I think if you're all focusing on this legislation, you need to really look at the state budget and talk to the folks who are the everyday folks who enforce the agency directives or try to enforce them, and you'll find out that they need help at this point. Those numbers are incredible, and I've interviewed a lot. I've interviewed probably 40 people, most of whom have left over the last. I've interviewed them since last spring. I'm interviewing more. There's going to be a lot more information coming out on this. But when the latest eruption, you've heard people upset about the removal of telework, which is kind of stupid as far as a general. Everybody's leaning in that, trying to get people to do more work from remote places, and the state is moving in the opposite direction. And these things are, whatever goals you're trying to accomplish, if you don't have the state's basic infrastructure, its people to perform the jobs they have, that it means nothing on paper. So, with the billions of dollars that the state is going to have and has already had for the last 4 years, no administration has had as much money as the current administration to spend on things that are important to people's everyday lives than this present administration. And I think you guys need to focus on your agenda, which I totally support, and the people I work with support, but you need to connect the dot between goals and the execution of the policy that gets to those goals. And I'll shut up from there.
I think that's a good point. And before we move ahead, we still have another 5 bills to discuss. So I do see that Steffi's got her hand up. So go ahead, Steffi.
I really want to echo that comment. It's true not only in health, but in water and every agency. And I was on, I go to the ECHO climate change and human health class that's on all the time through UNM. And today they had a session on all the tools on human health and heat stress. And they had someone from CDC, and they had someone from Texas, and they had someone from the environmental public health. And, the tools that we have are so inadequate. I mean, they're good, but they're just compared to what other states are doing. They really need to have this bill pass because they need the resources. And I do hope that they can fund it and get it staffed too. So I really support this bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I would say, Rebecca and Charles, there's a couple questions in the chat. If you want to answer those in the chat, that would be great. So we can move on unless you have something really essential to close with.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to answer these questions in the chat. I also have, we also have a 1-pager and 2-pager that we could share, but it doesn't seem to be able to upload in the chat. I don't know if you want to enable that or.
Okay, well, and you can send it to us and we can repost it on our website and we can follow up with everybody. Or if you just send us the link, we can link everybody to
Okay.
that.
Yeah, we'll send you follow-up. But
Right. Thank
Becca,
you, Charles and Becca.
questions, or are we done?
I think you're done.
And just so
Okay,
everybody
thank
knows,
you.
we are going to be, thank you for that. We are going to be gathering information on all of these bills like we do every year. And we will be preparing talking points for all of you so that when the session starts next month, you'll be ready to make your phone calls and write your emails in support of these bills.
So by way of updates, other updates, here's an update that's going to surprise probably all of you.
Yeah.
The public bank, the Alliance for Local Economic Prosperity, has decided not to introduce a bill this year for a public bank. They feel like there's so much misinformation in the legislature, they're just going to get killed in a committee quickly.
Which means it probably won't be for a couple more years.
So who knows? I mean, it's next session's a short session, so it'll be pretty tough to get that in. But
Yeah.
that was very disappointing to hear that, and we found that out today.
Yeah. Okay, and I think Jeremy's on now if you want Jeremy to talk
Sure.
about hydrogen. So we've got 4 or 5 more bills, so we really can only spend 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes each. Jeremy, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay.
I have, you disabled screen sharing. I can talk to it or you can enable it depending on.
Oh, you want to share screen? Okay.
Well, I
And
think while you're getting that ready, let me just give a preface for why I put this together. I was at a kind of a high level talk from the business community, and they were talking about how, last year there was a bunch of hippies with misinformation who were really confused, and we need to really ram this through harder this time. So hydrogen hubs did not die. They're coming forward again. And I really wanted to make sure as a community that we have good information. So I did some analysis on the bill and the chemistry of it to kind of translate it for myself. So I'll share that with you. And then what I think is I'd like to see if we as a community later, not on this talk, but later we can talk about, do we want to go the amendment route, how to make this bill better? Is it inevitable, or is there a way to block it? Does blocking it make sense? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm going to share this real quick with everyone so we can get through this in about, like 1 minute real quick. But let's see. So real quick, we opposed it basically. I can skip over that because I think we already know that. Blue was touted as a sustainable way to make hydrogen from methane, but research showed that it had an even worse greenhouse gas footprint than gray. I think a lot of you read the Howarth report. I'll show you a graph from that in just a second. What's happening here? Okay, green hydrogen, we kind of talked about that, and it seemed to require so much land that it didn't seem like a good idea. So what I've learned since then, besides the fact that the chamber and people like that are getting ready to push even harder this year, basically that there already is a hub formed in the San Juan Basin without us. It will probably use methane feedstock and will likely be using that hydrogen to create electricity for the grid. The other thing I learned is there's a couple things in industry that will not be able to be decarbonized without synthesis fuels or hydrogen. I'll show you a graph on that. And then there are more green technologies besides straight electrolysis that might make things better. So basically, the question for this group is, can we make a bad thing better by participating and getting amendments in there versus blocking? I'm not saying what I want right now. I'm just putting that out there. So if you look at this graph, transportation and industry make up over 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions, right? So we're talking about hydrogen for large vehicles, planes, trains, boats, et cetera. And then there's this raw material thing here. You see this is a blast furnace rotary kiln. This is the one, I did a lot of research into industrial decarbonization, and this is the one thing for raw materials. This is used in glass, it's used in iron, it's used in steel, cement. What you do is you blast this flame down a tube. It's very difficult to get an electric heating rod powered by renewables down a tube this long because obviously it's hot, it wants to deflect. It's hard to get sunlight down this tube for concentrating solar. It's just a very specific process that until a next generation of rotary kilns can be developed, we're kind of stuck with these probably for the next 20, 25 years. So I am interested in fuels for this. Real quick, this is a hydrogen hub. But last year, I didn't even know what it was. This year, it's a $7 billion program that came out in the bipartisan infrastructure law. It requires 6 to 10 regional hubs across America, and they'll produce 50 to 100 metric tons. That's 100,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day. And 1 or more will be funded from fossil fuels. That's a requirement. 1 or more will be from renewable, and 1 or more will be from nuclear. This is a must be by law. The end use diversity, you can use them for at least one will be electrical, 1 will be industrial process heat, 1 will be residential and commercial heating, and 1 will be transportation. And then geographic, they want these spread around, but 1 must be over a natural gas hub, which is why I speculate that the Four Corners one is this one. Essentially, if you were to read the Hydrogen Hub Development Act from New Mexico, that is HB4 from last year, not sure what it's going to be this year, that resembles this language. So if you're wondering kind of where a lot of that came from, it came right out of the BIL. What the BIL defines as clean, quote unquote, hydrogen is 2 kilograms of CO2 produced at the site of production for 4 kilograms of hydrogen. So let me just kind of show you real quick. I'm going to have to get into the chemistry just to show you what this means. This is the chemical equation for steam methane reformation, right? You've got methane plus water reacts to form CO2 and hydrogen. So if I normalize this for 1 kilogram hydrogen output, then if I just do the process, that's 5.5. So keep in mind that 2 kilograms required for clean definition. That is what the BIL supports in this law, okay? In addition, they're saying produced at the site. So that could also mean that you have to raise the temperature and pressure of that methane so that the energy it takes to raise the temperature and pressure is also possibly considered, maybe not, depends on where you draw the box. 1.5 kilograms would be combusted if you heated this with natural gas. And we're assuming there's 3 kilograms of CO2 produced from 1.5 kilograms of methane. I'm just going to put this real quick. If we did 100,000 kilograms a day, that would mean 450 meters cubed of water. That's about almost 1% of the Rio Grande, to put that in something you can understand. The emissions to the atmosphere would be 304 million kilograms of CO2 and 13 million kilograms of methane. That is the methane that is emitted in the processing of the gas, not the stuff that's combusted. This is the stuff that either leaks out of the ground or is used to process it in some way. So real quick, let me get to blue so that you understand how we get to clean, quote unquote. Here's the same equation, right? We just saw it on the other one. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this carbon dioxide from the process heat and this. Theoretically, you could sequester about 4.6 kilograms and 2.4 kilograms from either of these processes. If you were to do the arithmetic, this would mean less than 2 kilograms of CO2. It now qualifies for clean. The problem is we don't actually have any precedents for storing and permanently sequestering CO2. This is a big deal because it's the greenwashing that's happening. I think it could be done eventually, maybe 20 years out. We could be having a different conversation. Right now, I think this has a high likelihood of leaking. What I'm really worried about is that our state is going to get so far behind this approach and then find out that we can't sequester it, that we actually have something even worse, because now you have gray hydrogen plus sequestration infrastructure, and that's even more carbon footprint. So blue is potentially worse than gray. This is I call it the Robert Howarth killed the bill last year. This is the graph that I think Tom Solomon pulled out and sent around. This is just real quick, left axis here is greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, on the bottom here, you've got gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen. That's also blue, natural gas, diesel, and coal. And so I think the key takeaway here is that you've got more greenhouse gas emissions from hydrogen than you do from coal and natural gas and diesel. And that makes sense to me because thermodynamics, you can't create energy, right? You take gas and you add energy to it to create a refined gas. You can't just get free energy for nothing. So that makes sense. You're taking natural gas and refining it. So of course your carbon footprint goes up proportionally.
Okay.
So let's see. So
Jeremy, I don't think we have time to keep going on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think
This
people,
is very interesting. I think it warrants a fuller discussion,
Yeah.
maybe a whole group meeting devoted
because
to
it's
it.
pretty technical, and I think it's just gonna,
let me
you know,
get to this real quick.
Okay.
This is the hydrogen hubs that have been established already. Okay, you've got a Southeast Utilities led by Duke Energy. That's going to be gas. Appalachian region, we're thinking nuclear. Up here, this is probably a green hub. Midwestern, we don't know. This is a green hub, and this is the New Mexico hub. So the point is, this already exists. It's established without us. It's got the Navajo Nation, Nevada, and Arizona in this consortium. If we were to pass the law, we would have legal authority for a public partnership for the state to bond with other states to make this happen. That would pull it into the San Juan generating region, which is what I think they want to do. So I do think that New Mexico has a lot of clout in this hub. You know, I think without us, there's ways that they can still do this. Nevada, there's plenty of transmission lines here. We're not going to stop that kick, but they would benefit from being able to get into this area more in the Four Corners with us. I think, let me just skip to my last slide real quick. Basically, it has my ask, and I will leave it at that. We want to work with you. We want to work with people like 350 and NEE to come to a consensus on what to do about this. Okay, we need to figure out if we can get more green incentives into that bill. Right now, it's really targeted to blue. Tax credits would largely benefit the existing market, right? That means that we would be giving an advantage to those who are already in the game. That's steam methane reformation. HB4 plans for success right out of the bat. That means they're establishing a board that is so entrenched that it would take us like 12 years of perfect progressive sweeps in the legislature and governor to get rid of them. So right now we could get more flexibility into that governance board. We might be able to make them more accountable to us. Right now they'd be in and stay in. So one of the things we could do is carefully define that clean hydrogen to mean the entire cradle to grave life cycle of the methane, not just that one chemical reaction I was explaining. Permanent sequestration is another word in there, and I told you it can leak out of the ground. Responsibly sourced gas, that's another definition that comes in there, and I'm saying if there's a methane plume the size of Delaware above our state, I can't see how that should be responsibly sourced. We need to define that in our New Mexico terms, and basically we need more hydrogen hubs on the or we need more checks and balances on the hub panel. That is 6 out of 11 of those seats are appointed by the governor right off the bat. 5 out of 11 are appointed by the legislature. It's a lot like the Legislative Finance Council. You can't really get to them if you want to. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And I'm sorry we had to rush you. I mean, we probably could take an entire hour just talking about this topic, and maybe we do want to do something a little more in depth as time goes on.
Yeah.
So if you could, yeah, switch out of your, share a screen, that'd be great. And I don't see any initial questions, but I'd say if you do have questions, we only got 10 minutes left. Go ahead and put them. Are you going to stay on for another 10 minutes, Jeremy?
I can answer the questions. Yeah. I really
put
just
them in the
wanted you all
chat.
to see the quantities that were in that bill, because that really confused me last year. Was what do you mean by a kilogram of this or that? And just kind of seeing that, okay, I get it. That's what they're talking about.
And we'll stay in touch with you, and we can follow up with people and post some information on our website, as we start to get closer to the session, and as these organizations, collaborate to decide what's the best way forward in terms of whether we oppose it or whether we try to
and let's see the bill. It's going to come.
Yeah.
Let's be ready for
Exactly.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I
Thank you,
appreciate you letting
Jeremy.
me spiel on you.
Thanks. Yeah, so maybe the next bills we're going to talk about were mostly Paul was going to talk about. So maybe we can. Is there anything that we could save for next time?
No, I'm going to do it real quick.
Just going to give them basically a list, and we will follow up with all of you via our alert system. And Paul is going to be blogging about these things too. If you're not getting our alerts, or if you're not subscribe to the blog, please, you can do that at retakeourdemocracy.org, and those buttons are on the right side of the page.
So the first update is on Holtec. I spoke to Senator Jeff Steinborn yesterday, and he assured me that there was going to be a bill that would definitively stop Holtec if it passes, and that the governor is prepared to sign it. He didn't want to go into any details. He says he doesn't want to give the Holtec folks too much heads up so that they can prepare their attack and misinformation campaign. But that's something that will be introduced in January. The other update I wanted to give you is in terms of tax and revenue. Today's blog, I can just really short circuit this. Just go to today's blog. It should be at the top of the homepage at retakeourdemocracy.org. It largely pulls from New Mexico Voices for Children and lays out all the rationale. We basically have the biggest surplus in history by a long shot, and so much money that it's ridiculous that they're talking about basically a flat budget. There's a slight increase in the amount of the budget, and this is all organized by the Legislative Finance Committee, and that then delivers it to the legislature to wrestle with. But a lot of assumptions go into what they do, and it's a very conservative document.
Yeah.
So they're going to be meeting all this week, and we have guidelines and speaking points and contact information in that blog. So take a look at that.
I think we have $3.6 billion surplus this year. So we should be, I know that you can't start a new project that's going to, take up ongoing funding with that, but there's a lot that we could do with that.
They're also planning a $1 billion tax cut, mostly for wealthier American New Mexicans and corporations.
Yeah.
And one of it would be to eliminate the personal income tax. I don't know how far that.
I thought these were Democrats.
They're conservative Democrats. They're dinos. The other thing is that local choice energy, I don't think Mariella is on, is she?
Probably not.
We did a Zoominar with them last week, and probably most of you were on that. And they now have an action page where you can go put in your zip code and your name, and it'll identify who your legislators are, and you hit submit, and a letter goes out to them about supporting their legislation. That's at Public Power. We'll put it in the chat, but it's publicpowernm.org/take-action. And
Okay, go ahead.
be glad I'm not typing that in or we'd be here all night. And they also, just for more information, you can, it's the same thing. It's just, it stops at publicpowernm.org/, and that's just where you can start getting information. They have a wealth of information about what local choice energy is and how you can support it. Last update very quickly. I'm a member of the Food and Ag Council, and they did a 2-hour meeting today to prioritize their legislative priorities. And most of them are to seek increased funding for a bill that they got passed last year. And so it's going to be more of a budget item than a bill that they're going to be seeking to pass. But they also wanted to create a conservancy commission and give it funds, a conservancy trust that would have a commission overseeing it so that they'd be able to, this is getting back to saying ongoing funds. Rather than getting just a single year's allocation, they're seeking allocations to cover for the next 5 years. And then they just draw down each year. So, and the Food and Ag Council is tremendous. It's, they've got a whole set of priorities and values, and they use them when they're prioritizing their legislation. It's a long meeting with a lot of discussion, but it's a thorough process. So that's about it from me.
Anything about health security?
Oh, yes, thank you. Health security, I just got something from Mary Feldblum. And basically, to refresh your memory, in 2021 and 2022, legislators put aside what's called junior money so that it could be used to advance the design process. Basically, legislators want to know exactly how a Health Security Act would function, not principles and qualities, but exactly how's it going to be governed, how's it going to be paid for, what's it going to cover, et cetera, et cetera. And to do that, you have to design the system. You can't just ask somebody to come in and do a study. So they're designing the system. And the first year, everything went very well. The superintendent of insurance got excellent consultants, and those consultants answered the questions that Feldblum and the Health Security Campaign for New Mexico asked. This year, not so. Of the $800,000 that was set aside for this year's research, they issued one RFP for studying global hospital budgeting and nothing else. And so what Mary is planning to introduce in this session is a bill that would authorize the health, I think it's the health, not the health department, but the health committee of the legislature to oversee the process, because it's clear that the superintendent has too many things on his plate and is not getting this to move forward.
So let me just ask you then, because Elaine Gush put this in the chat. Why would we need more money now when the process appears to be stalled and the money isn't being spent?
Because it wasn't, what Mary wants to get this year is enough money to get it done. What she got last session was enough to keep it going. And so, you know, when you're talking about designing a health system, spending $1 million or so on the design is not stupid. I mean, you don't want to, and they don't want to do this so that it doesn't work. So they're being very methodical about ensuring that all of the, I mean, they have questions about how do you contain drug costs? How do you, how can you limit the amount of coding and data entry that doctors have to do? I had my hearing checked yesterday, and the doctor talked to me more about how much time he has to spend at his computer entering treatment codes and things so he gets reimbursed. And he goes, it's half his job. And so that's another aspect they have to study. It's not just that you want to eliminate a lot of that paperwork, but how do you do that elimination? And so that's what they're studying there.
Yeah, so Jonathan's asking, is there going to be a notes document on this meeting? Not really. I mean, the meeting is recorded, so it's available on our website, but we will be following up. If you are subscribed to the blog, or if you get our legislative alerts, if you don't, you can get access to both of those on our website at retakeourdemocracy.org. We're going to follow up with everyone on all of these topics and be sending out talking points and various things before in some cases before the legislature begins, but in many cases we have to wait to see the bills that get introduced before we can actually respond to them.
And with that note, we could definitely use 3 or 4 volunteers to help us with the research and preparation of one-page summaries of bills. So if you like to write, like to research, write us at retakeresponse@gmail.com.
Right. And I wanted to thank, we got 7 volunteers in the last week or so to be hearing observers for Retake during the session. If you'd like to do that, and I know many of you have before, we really rely on the hearing observers to take notes, and we use those notes throughout the session to update our talking points, and the information that's gathered then goes out to advocates across the state. So it's a really important role. There is a more information about that and a volunteer sign up form if you go to our website, retakeourdemocracy.org, and go to NM legislation, which is in the top menu bar. Right at the top of that page, you just click through and you can learn more about that, and it'll give you a link to volunteer. So it'd be great if we can get some more volunteers. We need about 15 people. We have about half of those so far.
Okay.
Anything else?
Anything else?
We're
from
right at
anybody else?
7. We're trying to respect everybody's time. Thank you for being on with us tonight. And the next huddle will be Wednesday, January 4th. That's about 3 weeks from tonight.
So everybody
I
have
believe.
a good holiday and stay safe and healthy and stay active. So
And
the way we
if you
fix
think of
this
any
is-
questions in the meantime, email us, retakeresponse@gmail.com. Thanks everybody for being here. And we'll post the recording of this if you know somebody who wanted to come and couldn't be here. It'll be up on the website under actions and events. Thanks a lot. And thanks
Okay.
to all of you who spoke tonight.
Thanks.
We really appreciate
Paul and
you.
Roxanne, really appreciate what you do.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Jeremy. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all of you. Good night, everyone.